as you can see from the slides, my name is Robert Wood. I work for Cigital. I'm our director of our red team assessment practice. Cigital focuses mostly on AppSec stuff, but we're moving into other realms of security, including red teaming. This talk, so I came from a strict red teaming and kind of forensics background, and kind of brought that into Cigital, and we kind of melded all of the AppSec assessment services there and all of my background, and we kind of developed a new approach that isn't really being adopted by a lot of companies out and about in the industry. So I'm going to discuss that approach, why we think it's beneficial, how you can get, the most out of a red team assessment if you guys are doing them internally or running them, standing them up, scaling some things, bringing software into the picture, because of course we're all software-centric individuals. So again, that is me. I've worked in a lot of different capacities. Most currently I'm working as the practice director at Cigital. I still do a lot of assessment work, anything from embedded device hacking up to, a lot of web stuff, a lot of code review. I've done a lot of really messed up oddball assessments. So I've pretty much spanned the gamut of security assessments. And I've worked in software network stuff, physical pen testing, which I'll get into here, social engineering stuff, mobile stuff, all over the map. So jack of all trades kind of approach. So red teaming in general. We were just having this conversation up here. It's not a new term. It's been around for years and years and years, and it comes from kind of military wargaming. And so military strategists used to use it. They would develop a strategy on how, they're either going to secure their base or attack an opponent or, do some kind of like tactical move. And they would approach it essentially from an adversary's perspective. So how would our adversaries, be it, some terrorist group, be it, our enemy that we've declared war on, whoever that may be, how are they going to break this plan down? And then how are we going to subsequently respond to that when they do X, Y, and Z? So that approach to evaluating a security posture of something, whether it's an organization, a plan, whatever it happens to be, has kind of morphed and evolved into the InfoSec world. So we're going to cover, what the current industry standard approach is, because you will see this out and about. Like if you Google red teaming InfoSec, you're going to see a lot of different references in a lot of different places, and a lot of people are taking the adversarial approach. I'm going to discuss where some of that may come up short, and why this new approach, at least we believe, once it kind of gets adopted in a lot of places throughout the industry, that it's hopefully going to provide a lot more value to companies who are doing this kind of assessment. And part of that is a big reliance on point-in-time risks, which I'll discuss. Some elements of what makes a successful red team, bringing software into it all, again, because Cigital is a software company, and of course we're all software people. And then scaling it up to doing some kind of continuous red teaming. So, we're moving into a point now where we have continuous application scanning, continuous network scanning, and that way we can detect changes and trends over time, as they occur in our environments and our infrastructures. And so we can do the same thing with red teaming, given a lot of the elements overlap. So how is it different than a regular pen test? So as I mentioned before, it's all about, evaluating something from an adversarial perspective, which, some may say, duh, I'm trying to pen test an application, or I'm looking at something from an architectural perspective. I'm looking at how it can be attacked. Here, we're all about looking at it from a goal-based perspective. So instead of just going on a bug hunt where, I'm evaluating, xyzbank.com, and I'm trying to find as many SQL injection and as many cross-site request forgery, as many cross-site scripting issues that I can on xyzbank.com. Here, we're going to take XYZ Bank as an organization. We're going to define some set of goals, whether it's, they're trying to protect their secret recipe to investing, they're trying to protect their customers' data, whatever that happens to be. And we're going to throw the kitchen sink at them with assessment approaches to accomplish whatever goal that we set out. And we're going to map that back to whatever their business goals are and subsequent business risks to those goals. It's more of an organizational assessment versus testing a specific target in a vacuum. So, if you're doing a pen test or, any kind of security analysis on xyzbank.com, you're oftentimes just looking at that one little slice of the organization. you're not going to consider. So if you find a vulnerability in that site, we don't really know what the risk is to things external to that site. So in doing a red team assessment, because we have a much broader scope, we can see how one issue over here may impact things way over here in the organization, and you may not be able to connect the dots if you're too close to the problem. Another thing is we're going to be able to measure how an organization actually responds to an attack. So in a lot of cases, when you're doing security assessments, you're going to be, you kind of get all your IP addresses whitelisted, and it's very controlled. It's very predictable in terms of how the organization knows you're coming. You have test windows that you're going to operate in. Here, we want to see, because our clients do hire, they do have incident response teams on staff. I've worked with them. I've been a part of them. We want to see how they handle certain attacks. If we go after a certain system or a certain, part of their network, or whatever the case may be, or we're abusing some particular functionality, we want to see how they respond to that. Do they shut us out? Do they blacklist our IPs for a little bit? How do we get around that? Is there some kind of scramble internally that may distract attention from something more important? So maybe we create a distraction over here and then slip in over here. So it's all about, seeing how you respond in that situation. A lot of this, it incorporates a lot of different testing services. So this talk is going to be more about the process involved in conducting a successful red team. And, in doing so, it's just like stepping through an SDLC. It does have very technical components, obviously, developing the code, stepping through design, doing static analysis, all of that stuff. Here, while we're conducting the red team, we're going to pull in very technical components of it. If we have to assess, a particular application or a particular embedded device, or bypass some access control technology, we're going to pull in an expert who can do that particular testing. Although from a high level, we're not necessarily concerned about that. That's just one more black box that we have to get around, to move one step further in our attack tree that we develop. And the last thing is, it's going to evaluate how an adversary is actually going to attack an organization. So again, in connecting the dot risks, we may not be able to see, while we're, kind of assigning risk likelihoods to xyzbank.com. We may think that this vulnerability is super important as security consultants, and you need to scramble and, allocate all your resources to fixing that one particular thing. And it's going to be a fire drill, when in actuality, an attacker may not give a shit about it. They might just kind of go about their business, and, that may not help them achieve whatever goal they're going after. Because ultimately, if an attacker can get access to customer data, however they do it, they don't really care. They just want the customer data. So that's what we're trying to emulate here. So some basic elements of a red team. You have, kind of the electronic sphere, the social sphere, the physical sphere, and they all overlap with each other. And that's the typical, if you watch any other presentations on red teaming, you'll see that traditional Venn diagram. I threw on the other little bits of recon and more in the center there, because it is a lot more involved than just looking at those different assessment components. Because really, if you just kind of throw money at each of those little testing problems, and you're not connecting the dots and putting this big picture together, then you're not doing any better than just another string of assessments. So we're going to move one step past that. So some of the things that you may consider in the electronic sphere. So obviously, we have our software, you have a lot of web apps, big organizations may have thousands of applications in their portfolio. You've got thick clients, you've got mobile applications, all of these things handling, whatever sensitive data your organization is there to protect. You've got network stuff. So maybe your stuff is in Amazon on AWS. Maybe it's, you have your internal network, you have, your external network infrastructure. You've got wireless networks on your office, on site at your offices. All that stuff connects and, is kind of intertwined, to support your organization. The mobile technologies, you've got embedded technologies. So all this stuff may come into play in conducting these kinds of assessments. So the social stuff, this is all pretty basic. An attacker may run through phishing attacks on your employees. Those are easy. Phone-based attacks, IM chat, social media. Those are all super easy. We all know about this stuff. We all know it's bad. We all know we shouldn't click on links. And we try telling people, but nobody ever listens. So it is. Keeps us all in business, right? We have physical security attacks. So we'll get into a couple of little stories in a little while. Me getting arrested in particular with regards to this stuff, but getting into actually entering into into an organization's facility, getting past certain access control technologies, be it RFID badges or some kind of like biometric scanners, because there's a lot of different ways around a lot of these different technologies. Access badge processes. If you maybe get together a business card, if I print out somebody's business card and hey, I forgot my card, this is like my second day on the job, or whatever, can I get in, or can you just give me a new like temporary badge to get into the building? A lot of times they're going to be like, sure, unless you have a really secure facility and they're actually going to go through and check. I was actually with one organization where I walked in and kind of made myself an employee. And I worked there for like a month. I was doing this social engineering assessment, but I worked there for a month. I was getting invited to like potluck lunches, and I eventually got sick of tailgating. So I went down and told security, I was like, I've been here for a month now. You guys still haven't given me a badge. Like, what gives? And they're like, oh yeah, of course. Like, here's your badge. Like, we're sorry for the inconvenience. So, all sorts of things to consider. And once you're on the inside, a lot of people, in the network testing realm, they're like, well, how are you going to get past our super secure firewalls? How are you going to do this? I've got all these configurations in place. I'll just walk past it. Your firewall won't stop that. So you got to incorporate all these things, and an attacker is going to incorporate all these things into how they come after you, depending on their level of sophistication. So some other activities that we're going to consider here. Obviously, reconnaissance is a big one. We can't just kind of willy-nilly just start like launching packets and launching requests at things and just start reversing some things, and it doesn't work like that. So you have to prep, you have to start to build a picture of what that organization looks like, and then how you're going to decompose it and break it down and get to your attack path. You have to build some kind of threat model, either developing it physically and writing it all down, or just jotting it on a whiteboard and getting your ideas up there. Develop some kind of threat model. Looking at business processes that kind of support the organization. So how do they handle password resets for employees, for customers? How do you issue security badges? There's all sorts of processes in place, whether it's, for a bank, maybe you have like debit and credit card activation steps. Is there ways around that? If you're going through the technical route of achieving that process, there may be certain controls in place, like brute force enumeration is not allowed or something like that. If you call up a customer service rep, maybe you get around a lot of those controls. So it's important to map those things out and see how you may be able to get around controls that are in place. Again, threat intelligence and threat modeling. Using this, once we do some kind of cursory threat analysis, we can match up an adversary's objectives, their capabilities, the risks that we identify in an organization, map that to what may actually happen. So we can lay out a whole bunch of antecedent conditions, and we can actually kind of predict or postulate a little bit where an adversary may be likely to spend their resources in attacking you. Again, we can measure how an organization responds to attacks. Risk management is a big one. So, a lot of times if you're going after XYZ Bank, xyzbank.com is probably going to be their flagship application. They're going to put all their resources into defending that. But if there's shared assets across a lot of applications that are maybe linked, they have, shared credentials somewhere else, or, some kind of SSO functionality where you've got a cookie over here that's not protected on a very lame app that's connected to xyzbank.com, you attack that site and then you use it to kind of pivot into xyzbank.com. That's something that that an attacker is going to consider, that their risk management processes may not, because this little lame site over here is not as important to them. And I'll walk through an example of how of an actual red team that we worked on that proved to be very successful. Role-based social engineering. And so instead of just doing kind of this point in time social engineering where I'm going after, Jane Doe on Facebook who likes to, disclose all this crazy information, and, that's the only way into an organization I can find. That's not very valuable for an organization, because if you replace Jane Doe, or you just tell her, stop doing that, and she stops, then, the whole organization, everything that you just kind of reported on goes away. In some cases. Whereas if you target obviously we want to look at those things because they are important, but we don't want to limit ourselves to those things. So if we look at role-based social engineering, where we're social engineering the role of a customer support rep, and they don't have controls in place to protect themselves from being social engineered. So it's kind of human agnostic, where anybody who is in that role is susceptible to social engineering. That's where we want to target them. And, that's where we want to actually help organizations improve their processes. So, maybe put this control in place, and your CSR roles aren't going to fall susceptible to this, very basic kind of phone-based attack or chat-based attack, whatever it happens to be. Those are all sort of things that we kind of consider in this scheme of, new age red teaming. So it's pretty comprehensive. And the current industry approach, if you look at a lot of companies, go look at like conference talks, go look at, get on the phone with salespeople and, ask them, how they do this stuff. It essentially looks like this. And it's pretty lame. It's pretty, it's pretty short-sighted. So a lot of people are very, network pen testing, as you guys probably already know, is very, very commodity right now. It's easy to do. There's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of frameworks out there. There's, you've got Metasploit, which kind of covers pretty much everything. So a lot of people, they'll just take they'll load up their Metasploit framework, MSF update, I'm all set. They'll, do a little bit of recon, find some employees, maybe launch a few phishing emails. They'll, load up some, embed MSF, like reverse payload or something into a PDF. I'm going to send a bunch of those in, send like 500 phishing emails. One person will click on it because clicking on stuff is fun, and they'll get a reverse shell. They'll maybe do a little bit of internal network hacking, and pretty much it. Some guys expand into the physical pen testing. Some don't. It's kind of, some people just enjoy it. Some people kind of shy away from it. And then essentially, once you get that, they'll just get into the network or break into a system. And then they write up a report and they're like, this is what we did. We owned you, even though we didn't get anything important. And they'll run away and they'll send you an invoice, and that'll be that. And they're not there to actually help you kind of understand where your problems may lie, which is unfortunate because, as organizations, we want to spend our money and actually figure out where our problems are. That's why we do pen tests. That's why we do code reviews. That's why we do these things internally and bring in vendors to do this stuff. We want to understand where our problems are, and we don't want to just know our problems. We want to fix our problems. So we want to actually decompose them and figure out what the root causes are to these things. So report, run, and invoice is not an effective strategy for this. So we kind of stepped through this. Why is this flawed? A lot of attacks today, we see all these things in the news. A lot of them take place at the application layer. If you're just running Metasploit payloads on, tied to phishing emails or trying to pop shells on out-of-date boxes, then, you're missing a lot of critical stuff. XYZbank.com may have all these critical SQL injection issues that allow you to get past authentication, siphon money, into other people's accounts, all sorts of crazy stuff. And if I'm just running Metasploit, I'm not going to see any of that stuff. There's also a lot of reliance on quick win techniques. So, again, targeting Jane Doe, who's kind of spewing all her information out on Facebook and Twitter, and who's very susceptible to social engineering attacks. It doesn't really tell us how the organization operates as a whole. It tells us that Jane Doe, she needs some help. And it doesn't really tell us how they're going to respond to that. Maybe they fire Jane Doe, maybe they give her training, but all in all, it's a very, very, you only get this little tiny slice of, what's wrong. Jane Doe is wrong. You don't know that, there's all sorts of other stuff in your organization that may be flawed. So the point in time risk reliance. All right, we're doing good on time. So the point in time risk reliance. So a lot of these are like very targeted phishing attacks. Say I send in my phishing emails with the Metasploit reverse TCP payload in a PDF. Somebody clicks on it, and I happen to get on, maybe I get on like a CTO's computer. He's going to have some kind of crazy information on his hard drive. Maybe he has some passwords or something that he doesn't want to bother to to actually remember. So he puts them all in an Excel spreadsheet, or he's got them linked in a share somewhere that are, I've seen this in so many, like countless organizations. It's so bad. But linked in like a share with, with no, no authentication or anything. And you can just hop over to that share, grab your sensitive information, and you just jump right to the point of, I accomplished what I needed. And it was all based on that one little, risk that this guy clicked on an email. And that's it. And then after that point, we're going to run away, we're going to write a report, and we're going to send you an invoice for, $50,000 and peace. So again, not really effective. It has its importance. Obviously we want to try to highlight in those kind of cases, we want to highlight why was this actually possible? Was it possible because, maybe you don't have effective desktop level malware scanning that would have picked up on, that PDF sitting there or sitting on your email servers or something that would have kicked that back prior to getting to the CTO's inbox. A lot of times these things don't come into the picture where you actually try to understand the root cause of why this point in time risk was allowed to happen. And that's important so that we can fix the root cause, subsequently fix the problem. So elements for a successful red team. So we have, scaling it up, we have expanding it, and we have, ultimately, hopefully securing our organizations. Fingers crossed, that's the end goal once we get all this money in place. So successful red teaming. So, like I said before, we always want to consider what the threat model is, whether, we're writing that down on a whiteboard, whether we're, formally crafting, Visio diagrams and all this elaborate threat modeling stuff like we would in a software case. We want to conduct some level of a threat actor analysis. So I alluded to this before, but really that's all about, defining, are you really concerned about hacker groups? What are hacker groups' motivations? Maybe they don't really care about, disclosing customer data. They just want to bring you down or, do a denial of service attack. That sucks. That's sorry. Hopefully that's not cracked. That's good. Maybe that you want to consider what their actual objectives are in terms of attacking your organization. Other different threats are going to have different objectives. You want to consider what their capabilities are. A script kiddie who's running Metasploit and, doing his MSF update, use exploit, blah, 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 set all this and then run is going to have a lot different capabilities than a nation state who may be coming after a defense contractor, a Lockheed Martin or a Boeing or something like that. You really want to take those into account because if you're reporting on an issue that, only a nation state could potentially exploit or find, and you're telling people that, this is like, run rampant throughout your organization. This is very likely to happen. Everyone and their mothers are going to be loading up, the next tool and exploiting you here. You don't want to cause panic within your clients or, internally if you're doing this stuff internally. So always consider adversaries' capabilities. And then once you get all that done, you can map those things back to risks that you actually identify. So if I find that a criminal organization, has, they're concerned with getting financial data and probably selling it or using it themselves to kind of siphon money out of accounts. They have the capabilities, the capabilities to go on site and do physical entry into a building. They have the capability, they can hire very advanced technical people. And of course, they have all sorts of SQL injection issues. We can kind of postulate that this is probably pretty likely to happen if it hasn't already. We should probably fix this, given all of these kind of conditions that are in place. At the beginning of any kind of red team assessment, whether you're a vendor doing these things or you're doing these things internally, you want to figure out what your business goals are. And from those business goals, whether it's protect business data or make sure that this service is up and available for customers. I just finished up a big red team assessment actually, and it was all about service. They didn't really care if stuff got out. It was all about service. So it was anything that could, like page rewriting attacks that would cause people to like lose faith in the system and run away, or cause it to like, this is confusing. It must not be working for the day, and then stop using it. They were more concerned about that stuff, or obviously bringing the entire system down, than people's data getting out, because it was kind of public data. It was kind of an interesting assessment. And then from the goals that you identify, you lay out some risks. So, risk may be targeted distributed denial of service attacks, maybe application layer attacks on, your Tomcat instance that, cause it to go down, or some kind of .NET flaw or something like that, because there's plenty of those out there. And you always want to consider the bigger picture for any risks that are identified. So I'll give a story that pulls that into a bigger perspective in just a moment. But if we're looking at our xyzbank.com and we find risks that are on you know, abc.xyzbank.com or, investor.xyzbank.com. And that's kind of a low risk application for them. They're not really caring. They don't really care about that. But again, they have shared assets, shared credentials, shared something, shared secrets between those apps, between the flagship and the low risk app. You want to consider the big picture. If something happens over here that can be subsequently used to attack that larger entity or that larger, more high profile application, then it needs to be taken seriously. That's no longer a low risk scenario. And one of the other things is trying to identify security themes across the organization. So instead of just identifying single bugs in a whole bunch of applications, say if we do a baseline scan of every application in your portfolio that we consider in scope for the assessment, are you consistently lacking output encoding? Are you consistently not using parameterized queries when you're writing when you're doing any kind of SQL database stuff? We identify these themes, and then we can say, with a somewhat level of certainty that, you're, as an organization, you guys are not implementing these security policies down to your developers. You guys, constantly are lagging behind in your patch management. We're constantly finding these same versions that are always vulnerable in your organization. And that's where the continuous red teaming comes into place to a degree. But if I'm just reporting on these single little bugs, I don't know that it's a problem across the organization, because if they don't have a patch management problem, if they're not, pushing out secure coding guidelines, things like that, that's going to be a much larger issue where you can implement something once and then fix all these things pushed out the line. So moving into threat modeling and threat analysis, just wanted to drill down just a little bit into the specific success component. So building out the entire attack surface across the organization, or across the scope rather. Ideally in a red team, you want it to be the entire organization. Sometimes that's not feasible. If you have, an enormous, multinational bank, they may not, they're like, holy shit, like we're not going to spend like $500,000 on this red team assessment because it's going to take you guys forever to figure out everything. So they may limit you to, one big system, for instance, or, a component of their, or, kind of a section of their enterprise. So building out the attack surface across the entire scope. So whether that's, areas, all the areas of input that you see, all the different network ranges that you got, different business processes that support it. So, where are there, CSR, like call us functions that, help me through this specific functionality? Are there account registration functionalities on these sites that apply to these other ones? Things like that. So this process helps you kind of put together these components and build composite attacks. So a composite attack, at least how we define it, is something that when you consider an attack tree, so you start out over here and your end goal is to get over here, stepping through each node in that attack tree. It's something that's kind of going to step across domains. So maybe you start with an application attack, move into a network attack, end with a social attack, or vice versa on the whole thing. But it takes into account multiple domains and multiple steps to get to where you're at. And if you're looking at a single point in time risk, then you're not going to see the bigger picture and see that these bigger risks or these bigger attacks can be accomplished. So we already kind of covered this with the threat analysis. And the other thing to consider with that is, does a certain threat actor actually have visibility into the attack surface where, you think they may be going after? So, maybe they, maybe you're considering like a low tech, just like a malicious user threat actor. So that was one of the use cases that I had in this current red team I just wrapped up. And, they were worried about people just, kind of non-technical people kind of trying to commit fraud and stuff. And so if they weren't concerned that if that person didn't have access to a certain part of the function, a certain part of the application, be it a CSR role or an admin role, they weren't worried about this person, like, conducting some kind of crazy privilege escalation attack or anything like that. They're like, these guys are not that intelligent. They're just going to be, trying to like call people up and just like defraud their accounts. Again, we can use this information to kind of set up all of, once we understand how the threats are going to attack the system, once we understand the system as a whole, where we're going to attack it, we can use these things to kind of lay out all these conditions that act as precursors to potentially malicious activity. So identifying business goals and risks. This is a big one. Actually, before we get into this slide, oh no, hang on, sorry. Push that out a little bit longer. So again, as we're getting started with any kind of red team assessment, identifying what the business goals are. We've kind of already touched on this, so I'll gloss right over this slide. But as you're kind of, so from a vendor perspective, or if you're trying to portray risk to upper management, as you're spelling out a specific technical risk, so be it a SQL injection or cross-site scripting or some buffer overflow that you found, you want to try to map that technical risk back to a business risk, because executives, people who are receiving these kind of reports, the executives may not go through or really care about the 100 pages of report content that you put together. But if you can get a snapshot highlight in your executive summary that shows them all these technical risks impact this business risk in XYZ way, that may be a big eye opener for them, kind of be a budget allocator, kind of push for you guys if you're the ones delivering this. So bringing software into the picture, obviously that excuse me, that's a big thing for us here at OWASP and here at Cigital. So software is oftentimes what's handling our most sensitive assets, be it SQL queries handling customer data on the back end and subsequently serving that up. You've got page content being served up. All sorts of things are being run and controlled by software nowadays. We know this. The network guys haven't figured it out yet, but they'll catch up. So in a lot of organizations, you may have, it might be a smaller group that only has, 1 to 10, 1 to 5, something like that applications, but they're really important to you. And you've got bigger enterprises where they've got thousands and thousands of applications and, they've just got code everywhere. They have no idea how to manage it all. And it's just kind of running rampant. And scanning the network oftentimes does not give you the complete picture. So if you're just doing infrastructure scans, you're going to miss all that stuff on the application layer. So, you may be fully patched, you may be, only exposing HTTPS, and you may be configured properly. And great, from an infrastructure perspective, you are secure. You got an A+ on your network report. Fantastic. You can go home, get your bonus, whatever it happens to be. From an application layer, you may have all sorts of problems, and your developers are going to be staying up at night, cursing you for your A+ star that you get to go home and put on your fridge or something for your network report. So the application layer needs to be considered in getting this holistic security picture that we're trying to build from a red team assessment. So we've touched on this already, the high risk of low risk applications. So obviously you have shared assets. You've got a lot of times subdomains also. And this will be the lead into the story I'm going to tell you guys. They provide a very, very good avenue because people are seeing the domain that they're ultimately, hopefully going to land on. They're going to see that in the URL. So a lot of people are like, to prevent phishing attacks, look at the URL. That'll tell you if the URL is accurate. It's definitely not a phishing attack. It can't be because it can't be. They really don't have a good reason, and they're wrong. So this offers a very, very good avenue for page rewrite phishing attacks. And cross-component customer support roles are also pretty big. So if you can call into one call center and get through one single kind of vulnerable process on one low-risk app, and again, if it affects a high-risk app, then it's money. Then you won. So the scenario that that I'll walk you guys through from a red team I did probably a year ago. It was on a really, really big bank here in the U.S. And essentially, we provided them all sorts of crazy attacks and, had a lot of fun doing this assessment. But one of the ones that was really interesting in particular, so they didn't have, to lay a little bit of groundwork on you, it was kind of a limited scope. So they gave us four or five top level domains, and they said everything, subdomains under that is all in scope. Everything, network infrastructure wise that's related to that is all in scope. Their employees were not using any kind of to get on their VPN, they didn't have any kind of multi-factor authentication. It was just, domain credentials, you're in SSL VPN, Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And so we did all our testing. We did kind of our baseline against everything. We did our network scanning, all that, kind of gathered all the information. We got a whole ton of emails and all that from just kind of scraping off of pages and just doing our reconnaissance. And on a lot of the, what we expected to find, a lot of the high profile applications from this bank, we didn't really find any issues. We couldn't, in some cases, we couldn't create accounts or we couldn't get accounts to look at the post authentication functionality. And so we just weren't finding a lot of stuff. It was just content driven, content being served up and then a login page. Not very interesting for us, unfortunately, from our unauthenticated perspective. What we did find is on a lot of the low risk apps, we found a lot of cross-site scripting issues. So what we did, and we found them on each subdomain. So what we did, we put together this cross-site scripting payload that essentially when you clicked on this link, it would execute each cross-site scripting on one cross-site scripting from each subdomain. And they were using cookies that had, they were scoped to the parent domain. So once we got access to that cookie, it could also be used to access the high-risk application or any high-risk application that kind of fell under that top-level domain. So the cross-site scripting payload executed one on each top-level domain from the vulnerable subdomain. We launched the attack. We found a flaw in their mail servers. So we launched the attack from their mail servers out to a whole bunch of people. We sent it to kind of this bonus. We created some phony bonus program. And we said, if you enroll in this, we're rolling this out and piloting it. You guys are the lucky ones to get this, to get offered this kind of scenario. And, if you click here, then, you want to click here to enroll and, it executed all the payloads really quickly. It took a little while to load, and then we just landed them on a domain site, or it was a login site, and said, this is, we use JavaScript and all that to just rewrite the page how we wanted it, and just presented them this login thing. As soon as we got their credentials, it just posted back to a server we had, and then we hopped on the VPN with people's credentials. And since we had all those cookies as well, we could access some internal apps that were also using that same cookie. We could access people's bank accounts, just all sorts of crazy stuff. And within probably 30 minutes, we had, a couple hundred people go through this and, successfully execute our attack. And, it ended up passing through the CEO's desk, and he was not happy because he didn't know about it. So he was kind of pissed. So another thing, if you're working with and trying to get these things funded, make sure your sponsor is very well connected in the organization, because our sponsor, even though he is very, very powerful in this group, his ass was on the line with regards to, because, his boss, his direct report was not a happy camper about this, because, we got his information as well. So yeah, that was, it was a really good example, and a lot of these problems that we identified, the fact that
CEO signed up for a bonus program that he probably suspects is wow. Right.
You would think he would have signed off on it, right? I mean, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, they sign enough stuff. So yeah, we got all this good information, and we identified these themes, across your organization. Obviously you have this risk management problem, and you need to start subjecting some of these applications to some sort of, because they're very, very basic issues. It's not like we had to do all this crazy encoding to get our payloads to work or anything like that. It was very basic. If you would have run these things through a basic white hat or AppScan scan or even Burp Suite scan, you would have found everything on the low risk apps that we identified. Very easy. And then you put all those things together, and we had this just terrifying scenario of transferring CEO's money out of his account. And I mean, if we had done that on a targeted scale where we're only going after a certain amount of people, and we were on their we were on their internal network with access to internal applications, it's very likely it would have kind of flown under the radar of incident response. We did it at scale because we're just we've already owned you guys so left and right with this assessment. We're just going to have fun with it. So we just threw the kitchen sink at them, and we got a lot of good stuff. So that was a lot of fun, and that leads into that's like picture perfect composite attack scenario. This is essentially what what ended up leading into that. So with continuous red teaming. So this is a concept that's kind of being developed at Cigital, and it's ongoing throughout the industry. All this continuous assessment, continuous infrastructure scanning, continuous application scanning. Everyone's kind of adopting this approach because it matters. Things are constantly changing. Configurations. Implementing new technologies. You've got a lot of agile shops who are pushing code. Like, what is some like Braintree, for instance, they're pushing code like every 15 minutes or something. Groupon is the same way. They're just always pushing more code. And, all those changes, you have no idea if any of those changes kind of result in a security vulnerability. So unless you're doing, you don't have time in that situation. If you're pushing code every 5 minutes, you don't have time to step back and say, all right, we are going to do a static analysis on this code. Then we have to submit it to pen testing. We have to triage results first. Those have to go back, get handled by developers, go through the alerts process, all that. Then we have to go into a pen test, and it has to get a formal stamp of approval before this can get released. And all that has to happen in 5 minutes. Have fun. It's not going to happen. So a lot of these agile shops just don't fit into the traditional, we're gonna do all these different security activities across your SDLC. Their SDLC is nuts. And so oftentimes you end up just kind of catching up in production, and that's the way it has to be. That's their business model. You're probably not going to change that. So you react, you adapt. So, a lot of times open source reconnaissance, we're going to have to really, really incorporate this into our process, because, we need to figure out when a company is kind of implementing new features. We need to figure out if they've got some big event happening that's going to increase likelihood of attack. Things like that, where, we know that an organization is kind of undergoing changes and, maybe more likely to be, subject to certain vulnerabilities, things like that. We're also going to try to evaluate risks over time. We can identify trends. So, oftentimes anytime you implement a new feature, we know it's going to be vulnerable to, we know you're not writing your SQL queries correct off the bat, because every time you implement a new feature, we find SQL injection in it. That means, we identify a trend. We can tell you guys, start pushing down some kind of secure coding guidelines internally. So that way that doesn't happen in production. You don't have SQLi in production. New network services, constantly coming out. Every time you expose the FTP, you have anonymous login enabled. Duh. But obviously don't do that. But we've seen that in a few of our clients where, every time they make some kind of configuration change, and they're trying to do things very rapidly to try to, appear sexy and, up to date and, fast paced, they screw it up because they're trying to move too fast, and they're not thinking when they're doing it, or they don't have processes in place to kind of protect themselves. The same goes for patches, configuration changes, all that stuff. And obviously application functionality is always subject to breaking because, more code, more bugs kind of thing. So the scalability process. So really this can be handled, in much the same way that a lot of the application and network scalability happens. You kind of have this central brain, this central engine that's kind of launching these scans. As soon as one thing finishes up, you're going to start another one, and you're going to constantly be collecting and triaging these results. Putting these things into, you can track trends through dashboards. So, every time we detect a change in a website, we detect this new vulnerability coming in, and we can identify that very easily. That's kind of stands out like a red flag. You can also cross-reference things. You can keep a shared asset matrix. This allows you to kind of connect the dots on this continuous scanning model. So you have this matrix where you're tracking CSR functionality, you're tracking credentials, you're tracking account registration, certain processes, and all that. This is a somewhat manual task that we're trying to kind of work around right now to completely automate into the rest of it. But cross-referencing that automatically with vulnerability trends, things like that, is going to be very important to you, so that you can just have this kind of automated brain essentially stepping back and just constantly evaluating your organization. And then you supplement that with, an actual red team of people who are going to kind of step back and, they're going to monitor the news. They're going to monitor and just target your organization and kind of see how things are going and, constantly try to attack you, because attackers oftentimes they're not going to try once or twice. They're not going to just go, we didn't get in once, walk away, and, that's it. Things are done. We're going to move on to the next company. They're going to keep trying. They're going to keep knocking on the door until they break it down and get in. So that's kind of our approach, or that our thought process here with the continuous scanning is, eventually we will find a way in. We're not going to try the exact same thing every time. We're not going to just keep kind of hitting replay on our scan button. So, we run an application scan. As soon as it finishes up, rescan, and expect to find, all these new crazy things happening. So that is actually the end of this, and kind of right on time. So unfortunately, I did not get into any of my arrest stories or anything like that, but I will be around. If you guys want to hear about that, I will be more than happy to tell you about some of the crazy shipping people into defense contractors and getting arrested and running from